Welcome to Weather Extra. I'm First Alert meteorologist Jillian Johnson. Numerous weather disasters impacted millions of Americans from coast to coast last week. From deadly and devastating wildfires, extreme heat, and to our first named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. We kick off Weather Extra this week by taking a look back at a tropical storm Alberto, who impacted parts of Texas and Mexico. Tropical storm Alberto made landfall around sunrise Thursday morning near Tampico, Mexico. The storm had maximum winds of 45 miles per hour at the time of landfall. Now, Alberto became a named storm Wednesday morning after days of churning through the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. But even though Alberto made landfall in Mexico, the effects of the storm were felt all along the Gulf Coast states. Torrential rains slammed the state of Texas, with areas along the coast and south of I-10 receiving the highest amounts. Flooding was also seen further south along the Texas Gulf Coast. Areas like Corpus Christi and Port Aransas received so much rainfall plus high storm surge that roads were completely covered by water. As you could see, there was major flooding reported in Surfside Beach and the San Luis Pass region, which are both located south of Galveston. This tropical storm also produced massive waves, which caused many coastal towns across the Lone Star State to flood. Waves reached as high as 16 feet in parts of the Gulf of Mexico Wednesday afternoon. Now, unfortunately, at least 3 deaths have been blamed on the storm. After landfall, Alberto was downgraded to a tropical depression and continued to weaken as it pushed further inland across Mexico. For a recap on Alberto and how the storm formed, we turn to First Alert meteorologist Sean Bellafiore. Sean.
Tropical storm Alberto became the season's first landfalling tropical system and, of course, the first named storm of the season. But as we move into what is going to be a supercharged hurricane season, I wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into why Alberto took so long to form. Remember, it was a potential tropical cyclone, a designation from the Hurricane Center before it gets a tropical storm status for a couple of days now. It definitely wasn't the sea surface temperatures, because in the western Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche, we're seeing well above 80-degree sea surface temperatures, which is that threshold for tropical development. The answer lies in how big the system was. Now, sometimes these tropical systems can have a very big envelope of how widespread the reach is of it. And you can actually see on water vapor imagery over the past couple of days that as it moved into the western Gulf, there was a huge area that was under its influence. That can happen with big tropical systems, but this system took a while to get going because of how big it was. As we zoom down into where the system was as it started to get going, notice there really wasn't much in the way of shower or thunderstorm activity around the center of circulation. So until thunderstorms started to blossom around the center, which happened Wednesday morning, the system was very, very disorganized. That influx of shower and thunderstorm activity Wednesday helped to get that center of circulation spinning and turning it into a tropical storm. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
The oyster industry in Texas has taken a huge blow after months of active weather across the Lone Star State. The overwhelming amounts of fresh water from the heavy rains have killed almost all of the oysters in the bay, impacting local businesses, especially in the Galveston area. Take a look.
It doesn't really matter where the rain falls. Once the skies have cleared, all of that water winds up here, flowing into Galveston Bay, then on to the Gulf. But that much water all at once can be fatal.
It's deadly to oysters. When you get that amount of fresh water, you know, they're resilient creatures, but there's only so much they can take.
Raz Halili is the vice president of Prestige Oysters,
One of the largest oyster companies in the country,
which is based here in San Leon. It's where they shuck, sell, and ship oysters to the rest of the U.S. by the truckload. Out in the water are their oyster reefs.
We had, you know, tremendous amounts of multi-generations of oysters here in Galveston Bay, and to go out there and see them all pretty much wiped out within a few weeks, it's tough.
The problem is that oysters can only survive in brackish water, the delicate mix of salt water and fresh that under normal conditions Galveston Bay is able to provide. But the persistent rainstorms and floodwater has thrown off that perfect balance to the point that the bivalves are dying and there's no way to help them.
$5 million worth of inventory that we lost here in Galveston Bay.
It's an expensive problem, which is why Galveston County Judge Mark Henry issued a disaster declaration for the local oyster industry at the start of this month. The county judge's office told us today the declaration will hopefully bring federal funding to the industry that suddenly found itself underwater. Raz says Galveston Bay's oyster industry is often overlooked, but for this crisis, the federal assistance is necessary. Not only for the oyster devotees, but also for the ecosystem as a whole.
They provide life for other creatures, they filter water, they clean our bay systems, and then they're our first barrier to coastal erosion.
With summer officially starting this past Thursday, wildfire season has been ramping up across the western United States. At least 2 people were killed in massive wildfires in parts of southern New Mexico, along with numerous blazes across California. CBS's Jared Hill shows us how the conditions were last week for millions of Americans out west.
It looks like an apocalypse. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. It was absolutely the most scariest thing I've ever seen.
The race is on to contain towering flames ripping through parts of New Mexico. Residents heeding a dire warning. Go now.
We've seen other fires, but nothing like this.
Pamela Bonner took this video of the smoke and flames rising above the ridgeline in the village of Ruidoso. Thousands of people in this part of southern New Mexico have been forced to flee. The now deadly wind-whipped wildfire burning through over 500 homes and buildings.
I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. As we drove away from the house, I didn't even give it a second thought.
It's not one, but 2 wildfires that have intersected here, about 75 miles west of Roswell, charring over 19,000 acres in less than 24 hours.
It's sad. These people have lost a lot.
New Mexico's governor has declared a state of emergency and deployed the National Guard as over a dozen agencies work to stop the burning.
We have 2 devastating, enormous fires. And when I say enormous, it means that they're getting more and more complicated to address.
Meanwhile, near Copperopolis, California, about 100 miles east of San Francisco, weaker winds helped crews get the Arrow Fire 20% contained Tuesday. Just the latest blaze as fire season erupts out west. Jared Hill, CBS News.
While firefighters were battling those 2 massive blazes across parts of New Mexico last week, severe thunderstorms developed and created new challenges for the first responders on scene. Heavy rain-producing thunderstorms managed to drop multiple inches of rain and even large hail at times, too. In just 30 minutes Wednesday evening, 2.5 inches of rain fell on top of the wildfires, which did end up helping the firefighters out, but it also created an extremely dangerous situation as flash flooding occurred along the burn scars. A flash flood emergency was issued by the National Weather Service in Albuquerque on Wednesday. Raging floodwaters created muddy rivers that flooded through burned homes and buildings. In total, some of the areas burned by the massive fires last week saw around a half a foot of rain on Wednesday, which forced even more people out of their homes. Those severe thunderstorms also produced some strong wind gusts at times, and winds from those storms impacted West Texas and New Mexico during the evening hours this past Wednesday. A massive dust storm known as a haboob was triggered by the weather conditions. You could even see the plume of dust marching westward from space. The third weather story of last week was the extreme heat wave that took over the northeastern parts of the United States and up into Canada. Millions were under multi-day excessive heat warnings, something we're familiar with down south, but for those that live up north, temperatures last week were unusual, especially this early in the summer. Take a look.
More than a dozen cities hit new record highs on Wednesday. In Maine, a local splash pad proved a good place to stay cool.
I get to get wet, and I like this place because it has a park, too.
A lingering heat dome is prompting officials in several states to activate emergency operations and open cooling centers. According to the National Weather Service, more than 80 million people will be under heat alerts.
Staying cool is a process this week.
In Michigan, Sherman Lake Summer Camp staff developed a heat plan.
We changed our schedule a little bit to have the hottest part of the day inside in our large gymatorium, and then just a lot more water jugs around. We're doing popsicle delivery, which is always fun to give a little bit of joy.
For people with outdoor jobs like these Vermont construction workers, there's little choice but to brave it.
Oh yeah, it's hasn't even hit what they say it's supposed to, and it's going to get worse.
Gerhard Arndt owns the Pennsylvania Lawn Care Service, and he offered a useful tip for everyone as the heat wave rages on.
Tomorrow's hydration starts tonight, so when you're finished your day, make sure you're going home and you're staying properly hydrated.
Sage advice as this heat wave continues to intensify.
Still ahead on Weather Extra, the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season could be the busiest season in history. We hear from those that fly directly into the storm on how they're preparing for this year's season. Welcome back to Weather Extra. June 1st marked the start to the Atlantic hurricane season. And as we just saw, the tropics are already heating up early on in the season. The National Hurricane Center is predicting a hyperactive season, forecasting more named storms than they ever have before. Hurricane hunters are some of the most important scientists when it comes to tropical systems, flying directly into these powerful storms. CBS's Christian Benavidez shows us how the group plays a key role in keeping millions of Americans safe this time of the year.
As a hurricane approaches landfall, the hurricane hunters approach it. Lieutenant Commander Joshua Rannenberg at the controls of this Lockheed P-3 Orion aircraft is one of them.
It's humbling to see that plane get tossed around like a leaf in the wind.
This team at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration helps meteorologists forecast where storms will go. They're gearing up for the most active hurricane season NOAA has ever forecasted.
What we have right above us is that tail Doppler radar.
Richard Henning has been flying into storms since 1995.
To get the very best data, the most accurate data, there is still no substitute for actually flying into it.
These aircraft will follow the storm from the development stage until it makes landfall. They'll travel through the eye wall as many times as needed to get a 3D picture of the storm.
What is this right here?
This is our multi-mode radar, which is a radar that scans 360 degrees around the aircraft out to about 250 miles.
Inside these small cylinders are drop sondes. And what do they tell you?
They give us the wind speed and wind direction.
They also measure pressure, air temperature, and humidity on the way down. New technology such as these Altia 600 drones are also on board, all providing critical real-time information as storms more rapidly intensify due to warming ocean waters.
It's amazing how you can begin a flight with one storm and 5 hours later that hurricane is completely different.
A team helping reduce danger while heading straight into it. Christian Benavides, CBS News, Lakeland, Florida.
First Alert Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor had the opportunity to talk one-on-one with the hurricane hunter as well in an episode of Degrees of Science. For a listen into their conversation on what it's like inside these powerful storms, you can just scan the QR code right here behind me. It'll take you directly to Brady's interview on our Degrees of Science YouTube page. And speaking of Degrees of Science, we have a wild story to share with you in this week's new episode. Brady spoke with a paleontologist who helped 3 boys from North Dakota discover a dinosaur fossil, which turned out to be a T-Rex. Coming up next on Weather Extra, we hear from the paleontologist himself about this wild story of discovery. We'll be right back.
Dr. Leeson, I know normally you're probably the one that makes the discoveries. Tell me this crazy story of how this T-Rex was discovered.
Yeah, well, this is just a remarkable story of discovery. And it really goes back quite a while, right? Quite a few years. And a couple of years ago, one of my friends I went to high school with starts texting me, and he starts texting me photos of he and his kids out looking for fossils, because he knew that I was a paleontologist. I spent my childhood out on the same hills looking for fossils and finding fossils. And then one year he sent me a picture of his boy Jetson dressed up as me for Halloween as a paleontologist. And I mean, I don't know, it was just incredible. I was just like, you know, if you guys keep looking, you're gonna find something. So just like keep looking. It's one of the best places in the world to find dinosaurs because it preserves the world's last dinosaur ecosystem before they went extinct 66 million years ago. So it's one of the few places in the world where you can go and find dinosaurs, and then the literal line in the sand that marks the age of the dinosaurs from the age of the mammals. And then July of 2022, he sends me a picture of his youngest boy, Liam, lying down next to the leg of a dinosaur. And I was just thrilled. And I text Sam back and I'm like, you guys did it, you know, congratulations, like that's awesome, you found a dinosaur. And so yeah, he was thrilled. I mean, it was his 2 boys, Jessen and Liam, and then his nephew Caden Madsen, that made the discovery. And then in about April or May, I get a call from Giant Screen Films, and they're like, hey, we're doing a documentary, giant screen or IMAX film on T-Rex. And we were told to reach out to you because you're one of the main players in the Hell Creek Formation. Are you doing a dig? You know, we need to have a dig as part of our documentary. And I was like, oh man, I said, I don't have a T-Rex, but I do have just an incredible story where 3 kids go out and look for dinosaur fossils and find a duck-billed dinosaur. So then they decided to join us for a couple of days. And so then finally in July of 2023, the boys take us all out to the dinosaur locality. And I'm looking at the dinosaur and I'm like, oh man, it kind of looks like a meat-eating dinosaur. I didn't want to say anything because at this point, all I'd seen were photos of the dinosaur. The boys, what they had found was you could see a leg and you could see the hips, and then you could see a few other small bones sort of breaking up on the side off to the right, which I thought was a bit of a neck. And within the first hour of digging, Justin and I are digging along, and all of a sudden, clink, and I brush, and it's just he and I locked in on this little tiny, spot that both he and I are digging on. And I pick, and he's like, he gasps and he points. He's like, "What's that? Is that a claw?" And I pick it up, and it's a T-Rex tooth, a crown of a T-Rex tooth that popped off. And he's like, kind of going nuts. I'm just like, shh. Like let's see what we got here. Kind of like if you're fishing or whatever, you don't want to tell everybody about the amazing fish you just caught. But so we start brushing it off, and we reveal 3 more T-Rex teeth just poking out at us. And he and I lock eyes, and we just exchange this wonderful moment. We're the only ones that know we have a T-Rex, right? In that moment, and I just sort of whispered to him. I said T-Rex. And then we both just exclaim, to everybody else, because again, I got about 30 people out there with us, that we got a T-Rex. And it still gives me goosebumps because the excitement on the outcrop was just palpable. Their mom was there. She starts crying. The interns, this is their first dinosaur dig, and their eyes are just going every which way, being like, oh my God, what's going on? The kids are going nuts, bouncing off the walls, the buttes, and it was just an amazing, amazing moment. So now that it's the dinosaur is back at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, we built a whole exhibit, a whole experience around this dinosaur. So we built a prep lab around this dinosaur skeleton, and then we also have fully prepared dinosaurs that lived alongside T-Rex we have as part of this experience. And then it opens alongside the film called T-Rex. And this is a film that will air in over 100 theaters worldwide. So it's really cool that the boys' discovery is going to be featured in a giant screen film as well as an exhibit here at a major museum.
You can find out more about the significance of this fossil discovery in this week's Degrees of Science episode by scanning the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube, or you can head over to our website, KWTX.com/Degrees of Science. Weather Extra returns after this. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Hurricane season is in full swing, and a new report published in the journal Nature is warning that dozens of cities across the nation are sinking at an alarming rate. New York City, Atlantic City, Virginia Beach, Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia are among the cities sinking the most on the East Coast. The study also showed that much of the Gulf Coast is sinking rapidly too, with southern Louisiana especially threatened by rising water. This also includes southeast Texas, like areas around Galveston, Freeport, and Corpus Christi. Climate scientists said these areas are now far more susceptible to devastating flooding from sea level rise than previously thought. The sinking is primarily due to excessive extraction of resources like groundwater, oil, and gas. And another study was done focusing on the Louisiana coastal wetlands region, which researchers say could be completely underwater in the coming decades. Scientists say sea levels are rising faster than the wetlands can grow. The study's authors say of the 253 wetland sites it monitored, about 6% are entirely underwater, even at low tide. Meanwhile, about 70% are in the process of drowning. As sea levels continue to rise as expected, the study predicts Louisiana could lose 75% of all of its coastal wetlands by 2070. And according to the National Weather Service, extreme heat annually causes twice as many deaths as hurricanes and tornadoes combined. That's why advocacy groups are asking FEMA to categorize wildfire smoke and extreme heat as major disasters like hurricanes. FEMA typically responds to natural disasters that cause major and obvious damage to physical infrastructure, which is why historically they have not responded to extreme heat. But heat is the #1 killer of any weather-related event, which is why nearly 36 labor unions and other health and environmental groups are asking FEMA to categorize these events as major disasters, which would then unlock federal emergency management funds. And speaking of FEMA's funds, well, the agency says it's running out of money. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration now reports that the U.S. has already been hit with nearly a dozen extreme disasters so far this year. Combined, those costs add up to a price tag of more than $25 billion. That means FEMA could slip into the red by the end of the summer, which forecasters say will bring even more destructive storms. The agency could have a shortfall of more than $1.3 billion in August, according to a report. A FEMA spokesperson says the agency is working with Congress to address the funding issue, and they're taking the steps to fund a reserve to be set aside for initial response and recovery operations. Well, Central Texas, we need to get ready for a hot and steamy week ahead. Summer did officially start last Thursday, and it's really going to feel like it this week, so make sure you're staying hydrated. We'll see you again next weekend for another episode of Weather Extra.